Welcome to the Coachzing Show, offering you the latest creative content marketing tips to help you work less, earn more, and help more people. Are you a coach zinger yet? Join the community where the world's best coaches, therapists, authors, and speakers come to discover the latest industry trends and partner with other like-minded professionals. Go to coachzing.com/community to join. And now, here's your host, Doug Foresta.
Hello, and welcome back to the Coachzing Show. This is Doug Foresta, and this is a show where we help you, coaches, therapists, speakers, and authors to work less, earn more, and help more people through content marketing. My guest today back with me is Dave Jackson from School of Podcasting. And, I'm really excited about this episode because obviously I'm very passionate about podcasting, but I'm noticing, it's interesting because I'm definitely noticing, and it sounds like Dave is noticing too, that podcasting is hot, but it's been staying hot. And we're going to talk about all things podcasting, the future of podcasting, what that means to you. So I know you get a lot out of this, and stay tuned. Dave Jackson's been teaching people technology since 1995. At one point in his career, he was a 3-time Employee of the Year winner of a $40 million company, where he worked in about every department the company had. And in November of 2005, he launched the School of Podcasting. He is one of the world's foremost experts on podcasting, and he's going to be speaking at Podcast Movement and other places as well. We'll talk about that. You go to schoolofpodcasting.com to visit him and learn more about him. Dave Jackson, welcome back to the Coachzing Show.
Oh, glad to be here. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. So I asked you a question before we went on about what is most exciting to you. And one of the things you had said was that you were really noticing that podcasting it became hot again, but it seems like it's kind of stayed hot, right?
Yeah, it's funny because over the years, something would come along, iTunes came out and it was like awesome. And then, people got hot and then it kind of cooled off and then something else would happen and it would get hot. But, recently it just seems like it's gotten hot, if we go back to the podcast app coming out on the iPhone and people are like, oh, wow, this is kind of cool. And the fact that smartphones really kicked podcasting in the pants and things kept going. And it just seems like every time you turn around and then recently, Serial was huge. That was big. And about the time it really started to kind of like fizzle out because there was no season 2 yet, it just seemed like something else was taking its place. And then recently with President Obama going on the WTF show with Mark Maron, that really spiked things up. And about the time, then we were all talking about that. And then more and more celebrities are coming on board, which has just been happening over and over and over. But now like Shaquille O'Neal, and I just heard this week that Popular Science is now launching a podcast. And it just seems like every time you turn around, there's somebody else saying, wow, this is actually legitimate. I need to throw my hat in the podcasting pool. And so it's kind of fun that every time you turn on, there's they're not all presidential kind of levels, but there's somebody else jumping in the pool. And just the fact that I'm also starting to hear it now. I was binge watching Orange is the New Black. And I think it's in episode 1 where the one character is talking to their one and they're talking about, oh, good God, I thought because the guy's a writer. And she goes, oh, just don't tell me that you started a podcast and it's a lot of work. So there's all sorts of little things where I'm starting to hear the word podcast come out of people's mouths that aren't podcasters, which is exciting as well. And it just seems like we're on a roll and it's rolling. So I'm excited.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is a question that I get a lot from people, which is, so podcasting is hot, but it seems like there's some confusion about what a podcast can and can't do. And I'm curious about your thoughts about this. And of course, John Lee Dumas is, someone who's made a lot of money in podcasting, and people have looked at that and said, I'm going to follow that model. And then, I'm curious for you, and we talked about how, I've said this on air before, if you're looking at John and saying, I can make that kind of money, I can be a podcaster like him, it's kind of like looking at LeBron James and going, I can play basketball. LeBron James plays basketball, I can play basketball. But I'm curious about what you see as, for most people, right? For most people, what do you see as what podcasting can do for your business, for your, for your message, for whatever it is people are trying to do?
Yeah, for me, I have a client right now that started a podcast. He works in the banking industry, and I was telling him about New and Noteworthy and, different ways to launch your podcast and microphones and such. And I kind of asked him, I go, well, what's the major goal? Like, how would you know when your podcast is successful?
Right.
He goes, you know what? Can I tell you, I really don't care about downloads. And I'm like, okay, well, I go, what's the point of the podcast? He goes, it's opening doors. He goes, people that I couldn't talk to before, when I say I have a podcast, he goes, they're like, oh yeah, I'll come on your show, because they want to be seen as an expert. And when you're the guest, you're kind of like the content expert. So people love to be in that role. So he said, I'm getting doors open. And he goes, that then leads to me building relationships. It's getting the door open. So I was like, well, that's interesting, because I've always known that. I've known so many people that have gotten to speak to their heroes, or they've gotten involved in movies, and all sorts of different doors have been open because nobody will talk to me because I'm just Dave Jackson. But when I say I have a podcast, they're like, oh yeah, I'd love to be on that. So that is one, I think, that really kind of gets overlooked. We all look at the money and this and that, but just sometimes just the relationships that it can help foster is something that is hard to put a price tag on in the long run, because, you never know where down the road somebody's going to call your name to, do some sort of event or speak or, JV partner, whatever it's going to be. And that all came because you asked them to be on a podcast.
Well, that's really interesting, because I do see a lot of people, they get, they're on Libsyn every day, they're tracking their downloads obsessively. And so I guess part of what you're saying is there's a lot of different definitions of what success could be.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I always ask people, how will you know when your podcast is a success? And some people are like, when I'm making $10,000 a month, and other people, when I pass 7 million downloads, and then other people, well, when I sell, when I have a New York Times bestseller. There's all sorts of different reasons. And other people like, to be some sort of charity, or, when everyone in the world understands that, whatever their cause is. So there's all sorts of different reasons. It's not all about, the Benjamins, although that's what keeps the lights on. But there's all sorts of reasons to start a podcast, and there's all sorts of different ways to profit from it. I have a guy sent me a voicemail last week, and he said, my brothers and I were super close growing up. They're all older now. Everybody's married with kids. And he goes, we've kind of grown out of touch, and it's a shame. He says, so we sat down and said, we're going to start a podcast because we all love Formula One racing. He says, so every night, every Sunday night, we get together. All the families know that, hey, that's the time when all the dads are going to get together, and we kick back and we talk Formula One racing. And he goes, I got to tell you, this is the best thing we've ever done. And we're all getting kind of jazzed up again about Formula One, and it's bringing the family closer. He goes, because now we kind of all have something in common to talk about. In addition to Formula One, we're all working together on the podcast, and now the wives are starting to kind of get involved. And he said, it's weird. He goes, it's building the family through a common goal of building a podcast. So that is something that a lot of people, I don't think, really acknowledge as something else. I know I have a couple people that are doing podcasts with children under 10. And I always want to just sing, Cats in the Cradle every time I hear this, because just think about what that's going to be like when that kid turns 24 and he's getting married, and you go, hey, here's a little audio clip of little Billy at 6, so it's going to be interesting to see. But there's all sorts of different ways to benefit from podcasting.
I wanted to go back just for a moment to what you were saying about podcasting, how for that guy, essentially he was using it as a networking tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to give a shout out to, Jessica Rhodes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so she's fantastic with this. And I think she really uses this well. And we had this conversation about how it's not just about the downloads, but I've had this thought of, like, just as an exercise, I believe you could go from an absolute outsider in any industry to probably within a year become someone that's in the inner circle of your industry just by having a podcast and interviewing people. And they don't have to be, they may not be big names in the sense of anyone else would know them, but it's like, if, I often have thought that, like, just as an exercise to say, okay, could I get inside, like, I don't know, the Beltway, or could I get inside whatever it would be, TV writers of America, or, fiction authors of, young adult novels. I mean, you could probably take almost any subject and kind of get into the inner circle of it just from a podcast.
Oh, absolutely. Joanna Pen does the Creative Pen podcast. And when she started that, I interviewed her years ago, and she was just starting out. And here was this woman that really had a passion about being an author and launching and writing your own books. And so she went out to interview some of the top people in that industry. And this was back when, Create Space and all that stuff. And this is before the Kindle, I think even. And so just launching your own book was something that was just kind of unheard of at the time. And so she interviewed all these top experts. Well, now she is the top expert. She has a podcast and she gets to go speak at these different places. So you don't have to be the head honcho in an industry. In fact, that's always kind of fun. I call that a journey podcast, where you're along with the ride for somebody as they discover the ins and outs of how to be the subject matter expert. And then in the end, you are the subject matter expert. And the other thing about guests is it's not always about getting a big, well-known name. It's about getting a guest that's going to bring value to your audience. I mean, I can get Seth Godin on a podcast if he's got a new book, but that's not going to do any good if it's a podcast about Formula One racing. It's just not going to work.
That's right.
So, and I'm starting to hear that through a couple of different people who have tried that strategy of, I'll get a big guest, I'll get a big name, and their big, huge following will come and they'll stay for the next episode. And that's not always the case.
No.
Number one, these really big names in some cases don't have a lot of time to promote your episode. They're very happy to be on and they're very happy to, provide content. But when it comes to really, really promoting it, they may have other priorities that may not are as quite as high as you would hope it would be. So it really is about getting the right guest it always comes back to bringing value. And that's really what you should look for in a guest.
That's brilliant. Can you also, so with that, we're saying, downloads aren't everything, but I don't know anyone who has a podcast who doesn't want to get more people to listen to it. Can you share a little bit about, some ideas about how to get more people to listen, how to get more listeners, how to get more subscribers?
Sure. Before you hit record, write down what is the golden nugget that people are going to tell their friends about.
Yeah.
And if you can't answer that question, don't hit record. And so, that's really part of it. I read a book called, I think it's called Fizz. It's all about word of mouth marketing. And it really kind of boils that down to that. Because really the way people are discovering podcasts, besides going to Google and typing in, insert subject here, podcast, is their friends are telling them about it. So, try to think about, okay, what am I going to talk about in this show that are going to have people going, oh my gosh, I can't wait till I tell Doug about this. This is amazing. So that's kind of one. And then I would say growing your audience, it's simple. It's just not easy. So I would say, number one, know who your audience is. Number two, try to come up with content, again, that's going to impact them, that's going to inspire them in some way. And then number three, and this is the part that everybody kind of wants to skip, you have to kind of go where they're at and then make friends with them. Start to have conversations with them. And a lot of times people want to skip that step. They just want to go to where they're at and say, hey, I have a podcast. Well, if you walk into a room and say, hey, I'm Dave, I have a podcast, and people are like, who's that guy again? It doesn't work. So you have to kind of go out and bring value to any conversation you have. And then when you say, oh, by the way, I actually talked about this a couple weeks ago on my podcast, and people go, oh, you have a podcast? And I go, I didn't know that. Yeah, it's right here, episode number 6. And you point them to them, like, wow, this is really cool. And now they care about your podcast because they care about you. And again, if you deliver value and the podcast delivers value, well, who doesn't want to benefit? So I wish there was a big golden switch we could, just flip and get it there. But the people that I see that are growing their audience, that seems to be, what they're doing. It's just a matter of the hard part is figuring out who actually is listening. And then the number one is figuring out where they at. So you can go out and make those decisions and those relationships and things of that nature. But, and I think that's why some people start a podcast and then they kind of fizzle out because they expect this big tsunami of listeners. And it's great because when you get that person that really does know, like, and trust you, to me, there's nothing more fun when somebody calls me up and they're like, yeah, I spent the whole weekend listening to you. And you are the guy I want to start a podcast with. I'm like, well, there's the end of cold calling. Okay. This guy's he calls me up to say, where do I sign up? That's awesome. But that took, he listened to, who knows, 20, 30 episodes. So that's 20 or 30 weeks that I put those out, and it's great, but it's not going to happen overnight. And, I wish there was, but it is great when it happens. And then that then becomes your sales staff. Those are your brand advocates that go out and tell people, you got to hear this podcast.
That is so brilliant. And I would say that what you said about before you hit record, what is your golden nugget? And if you don't know what it is, don't hit record, is the golden nugget for this episode. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I hear so many shows are like, well, I always come out on Monday, so it's Monday. I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about, but the dog threw up on the rug today, and you're like, oh, and I hit stop because I know where that's going. And so it's like, ugh.
I so appreciate you saying that though, because that is exactly, that's been a challenge for myself, is to really like, how can that should be a challenge for all of us as podcasters.
Yeah, it's tough. And that's where I would rather have a show be late, but deliver value than be on time and be a waste of 20 minutes.
Right. Just cranking them out.
Yeah. And I think, there have been people that have achieved success with, many, like a podcast every single day or 3 times a week. And I always say that is, let's say it's 3 days a week. It's 3 days a week with valuable content. It's not just the fact that it's out every day. It's the fact that people are walking away going, man, that was really good. I can't wait to tell so-and-so about it.
Yeah, right. It's the McDonald's hamburger, right? Over 1 billion served. It doesn't make you want a hamburger.
No.
What do you think? I mean, this is a hard question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, what do you see, if there's something that you can see on the horizon as the next big disruption for podcasting? Is there something right now that you're going, wow, this could really be another crest of the wave?
Well, I think I pray that Google gets on board. They're the one big player that really hasn't, they had the Google, I think it was just called Google Play. They used to have an app that was native to their operating system that, of course, they killed. And it's just such a huge opportunity on the Android side. And I know there are companies like Blueberry, which have subscribeonandroid.com, that they're getting the actual Android app, the app makers, to put a piece of code on. So on the iOS side, you have basically the 1 or 2 click subscribe in iTunes and such. And so Blueberry's rounding up all these app makers to make it just as easy to subscribe on the Android side, because if you look at it, I think it's 6-1 the last time I heard, in terms of people that listen to podcasts, for every 1 person that listens on Android, there are 6 on iOS. And I look at that. But if you look at the numbers, I think there are more Android devices when you count things like Kindles and all the other devices. There's more Android devices. And if we can get those people into podcasting, that could be a huge wave. So that's one that I look at and go, okay, we haven't figured out how to solve that puzzle, but that's a definite opportunity. And then more and more things are just, I'm hearing here, I think it was Chevy now has 14 different models that are going to have some sort of in-dash, iOS or Android, play in the car kind of thing, which technically we already have. When I get into my Prius, my phone just ties into the Bluetooth and, podcasts start playing. So on one hand, I'm excited about that being in the dashboard, because it's just going to make more people go, what the heck is this podcasting thing? But on the other hand, I don't think that one's going to be quite the giant wave when it finally shows up, but it's slowly inching in. And, I hate to hear about people losing their jobs, but I just heard where CBS radio just laid off like another 200 people. So it's going to be an interesting fight, because I don't think radio is ever going away. I know some people think it's
any more than like newspaper, right? People were like, oh, the newspaper is going to die.
Yeah. And it's, I remember when the VCR came out, people were like, oh, it's going to kill the movies. I don't think so.
No. I'm curious, Leslie, about Spotify, your thoughts about Spotify and how they're picking up podcasts and how big a deal you think that is.
Well, it's kind of funny, because I'm actually in Spotify and it's still kind of a beta, which is good. And I've got an email in, because if you want to hear me on Spotify, you have to search for me. So I looked at my stats for the last 3 months, and I've had 1 a month. And so I have 3 whopping listens in Spotify. And it's interesting, because when you go into Spotify on your phone, you click on shows, and then I click on audio, and I can just scroll and scroll and scroll. And they're all the kind of usual players, the Mark Marons and everybody else. I'm really excited about it. For me personally, so far, I just finally looked at my stats for the first time, and I'm like, is that 3? No, I'm like, that's for 3 months. I was like, wow. So, I'm excited. It's, one of those things that so many people, especially younger folks, are into the Pandoras and the Spotifys of the world. And to me, when I used to have a forum for the School of Podcasting, and it was always kind of something that required like a kickstart. You really had to work that to get people there. And so the one day I just thought, you know what? Everybody's on Facebook already. Why not just create a private Facebook group? Yeah. And I did, and I don't have to do anything to it. It just runs and runs and runs. So I'm hoping that in the same way, by going where people already are, Spotify, and I'm hoping this Spotify move makes Pandora go, maybe we should think about something like that.
Right.
I think is going to eventually, that's another one that I think down the pike is going to be fun to watch, because I don't have any inside information. I just keep thinking that, those two are really slugging out at each other. So if one does it, the other one's probably going to follow in some way or another.
And again, I'm asking you to have a crystal ball here, and I know you don't have one, but I mean, you saw we had that lull, right? The last lull in podcasting. From what you're seeing, does it look like there's enough new developments to keep podcasting churning along and keep people's interest?
Yeah, absolutely. Because really for the past 10 years, we've had what comes and goes is not podcasting. It's the coverage of podcasting. If you look at the numbers, downloads have gone up every single year for the past 10 years. We just keep having, Rob Walsh of Libsyn did a great presentation at New Media Expo, and he was talking all the way back to 2007, where it was like, hey, podcasting's not dead. And then in 2009, hey, podcasting's not dead. It's like they keeps getting pronounced dead and resurrected about every 2 or 3 years. But meanwhile, the numbers keep going up and up and up and up. So, yeah. And the other thing is they're just more and more, like every day I get approach from people that like, we would really love your opinion on, like I just got contacted by somebody who wants to generate a system for podcasters to use that will dynamically insert advertising into their MP3 files, kind of like the big boys.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then another one was how to record a Skype. It's some sort of double ender. There's a ton of those coming out now because all these people are doing interview shows. So I keep seeing products with the target audience being podcasters. And so to me, that's kind of an indication that, again, there's just enough people doing this and enough people that are going to be getting into it that these companies are going, yeah, let's sink some money into this market.
Dave Jackson, if people want to learn more about you or they're thinking about starting a podcast, what's the best way for them to do that?
Schoolofpodcasting.com is my main hub. And then all my shows you can find at powerofpodcasting.com.
Dave Jackson, I'd love to have you back again in the future to continue the conversation. You've shared great content. I really appreciate it.
Oh, anytime, Doug. You know me, twist my arm. I'll talk podcasting all day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I want to remind you, I'm doing my own push to remind you that if you've not subscribed to the show, then go ahead and do so, because then you won't miss episodes. You'll get all the previous episodes. We have almost 300 episodes now of lots of great content about how to get your message out. So I encourage you to do that. Be back Monday through Friday with more great guests, helping you to work less, earn more, and help more people through creative content marketing. Till next time, this is Doug Foresta at The Coachzing Show.
Thanks for listening to The Coachzing Show. Need help getting your book out of your head and onto paper? Need help marketing your books or speaking engagements? We can do it for you. Go to Coachzing.com to learn more. Are you a coach singer yet? Join the Coach Singers community, where the world's best coaches, therapists, authors, and speakers meet. You'll get exclusive access to private mastermind calls, where you can get instant marketing help from industry experts. Plus, we'll help you forge deals and partnerships with other like-minded professionals. Go to Coachzing.com/community to join now.